a lawsuit waiting to happen. Because for the state to decide in a blanket way that we're going to give students substandard funding because they're somehow substandard students is a terrible message. If a local school system or a collaboration of them want to make the decision that they can do this very low-cost model with QBE funding or just the addition of providing some facilities, which they do now, then that's a local decision. But I do not think that the state could do that. And remember, right now it's, dribs and drabs all over the state. I think it ends up being about 7,000 students. It won't stop there. I mean, just wait when Cobb and Fulton and DeKalb, you think they're going to be left behind in the greatest deal? I mean, taking an entire category of students out of their accountability. And when you say it's not rocket science. School systems do this now. They can step up and one or more or multiple ones can be the LEA. And as I said, some are starting to talk about that now, a year and a half later. But I think there was, I don't think they were told the whole story as to, you got to drop dead, get with it. And now it's just dawning on them that there's been, folks who've tried to just keep perpetuating what I don't see continuing. And it's let's work on how to solve this. I'm actually dismayed that the state DOE didn't hire someone until a year and a half after the bill passed. Because there's funding in there, 2%, DOE is getting 2% per student of their total funding to help manage this. Well, we had a law that passed. And, folks can keep advocating, let's change the law, but that's a pretty tall challenge given that the clock is ticking. And we have students who are relying on this and who are benefiting from it. And, they do it with college and career academies. Why can't they do it with this?
Ms. Zolley, did you have a follow-up?
Just one.
Yeah.
So do you have a recommendation coming out of your study committee? Did I miss that?
The recommendation is we are satisfied with the legislation as passed, and that they need to figure out, do the superintendents value this program enough to come up with a local solution? Because, this is already, except in, legally with a contract, this is a locally approved charter system. Look who's on the governing board. We have Mountain Ed, Coastal, and Foothills are the providers. They're essentially the management companies. And, the superintendents make it up. And so if they can manage them as a governing board, superintendents are about the smartest people I've met personally. They know how to manage a very complicated business, and they have a good bit of help. The department has hired, from what I understand, a very talented man to help them with this, but it doesn't need to be to advocate on how to change it. It's called, the clock is ticking, and they need to move forward so that students can be served.
Ms. Rice, did you have a follow-up as well?
I'm just putting together what was said based on the fact when you started the charters, and you're right. Charter, when we started, there was conventional charter, startup charter, locally approved. We had but we did have a mechanism to account for accountability. And charter and flexibility at this level at DOE would monitor every one of those charters as they came through the state. Now, this non-traditional, and like I said, I'm just processing this, but the accountability issue seems to be
that is the big
part
issue.
of the biggest packet of this. How do we come up with something that reflects what you're talking about? Kids that probably are not really need to be there for this reason.
It would be a program.
Yeah,
It
and
would be a program.
I got to think on this, but I know you have, and I'm just
Right. Just like college and career academies are a program with a sponsoring LEA. And the performance of the students go back to the local system from whence they came, so that, System A isn't, being responsible for System B students. It goes back, the model exists. I get these like glazed looks when I talk to the staff from the schools, but it's not rocket science. They do it now.
But if there is a cluster
Yes.
of non-traditional kids that don't function, you've seen that, they don't function back in that base. How do we mold that into the accountability level at a school so that they're not really having to, they really don't want to go back to a base school sometimes?
They don't have to. There's no,
Okay, they can just go on to workforce.
They would do it no different.
Okay.
Remember, like Coastal's only been around for 4 years.
Right.
How'd they do it before that? And this has offered those kids another option which they could continue to have if the superintendent. So if Superintendent A is sending 5 children to a cluster of schools that have gotten together through intergovernmental agreements, you would contribute whatever they decide for the education of those kids using similar sites or different sites if they want to. But the model's there now. The infrastructure's there. I would assume that they would want to hire most of these good people behind me who have been doing good work. But it's the governing board members that have to make that decision. When you say, how can we can't. They have to take ownership, and that's something one of the members of the study committee kept saying over and over. It's their kids. They have to own them. We can't go down statewide a policy of taking every student at risk of dropping out, taking it out of their systems because the incentives are bad. I wouldn't support it with kids with special needs, and as I mentioned, kids who are having, can't read in 3rd grade. That's where the accountability comes. And then you're assured that students who should be in these programs, that's the right fit for them because there's no benefit to anyone else. When we look at the state charter schools through the commission charter schools, they're different in every respect except the word charter. They have zero connection to their local school board. They were created in spite of their local school board, who almost always denied them. There's no incentive to the local school system to send a kid there or not, because there's no connection. And they, we created it to provide a public, because I personally really value public education, to provide a public education choice. They accept students on a lottery basis. There are all kinds of students. They could be students who, are at risk of dropping out. They could be students that are, top of the class. They could be any kind of student. And they don't cater to just one category. Some of the kids have special needs, some don't. And you'll hear that these schools have some of that too. The defining difference, though, is they're behind or they're encountering some issues. And when a state has, I know it varies, pretty much, but our state graduation rate, I would want to get the number right with superintendent, but it's over 80%. But, excuse me?
84.1.
So 84.1. So 16% of kids in Georgia in high school going to come to these schools? Because let me tell you, they're spreading like wildfire everywhere. Are we prepared to have that many students taken out of this shared model that we have with? I believe in local control, and state charter schools were a reaction, not in defiance of local control, but to give another public school choice that is of no benefit to the local school system. There's no incentive, there's nothing there, they don't form the board. They don't even, most of the time they denied them. I would prefer that there be no state commission charter schools. I would prefer that they all be locally authorized. But we've gone 3 years before we passed the constitutional amendment before a single school system had agreed to offer it, to approve one. And let me just also say, there is a budgetary cap. It may not be set in stone as to how many students we can pay both sides of the equation, QBE plus local funding. And I don't know what that cap is, but there's not going to be like hundreds of these state commission charter schools, because Georgia, unlike Hawaii, unlike Indiana, we have a shared model of funding. And we value our partners in education. We provide the check and, you know, help through the DOE and through your efforts, but ultimately the responsibility ends at the local school system.
And if we've got, I want everyone that has a question to be able to ask it, but we've got about 15 minutes left. I promised a hard stop. Our partners from Foothills, Mountain Ed, and Coastal are here as well. So if you have a question of them, this is the time to ask it. But I did want to move down the line and make sure that everyone that has a question of one of our partners, either legislative or with the schools, can ask it. I know Mr. Rowe had a question, and then Dr. DeJarno had one as well.
Mr. Chairman, is there gonna be another presentation?
If we need to, we will. When you say today?
No.
No.
We've already heard from them at the
Okay.
retreat.
But if we need to have another
But
work
if-
session,
They're here to respond to questions.
I understand.
right.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention one. I know in particular Foothills partners with us with DJJ and has some students. Those, in my opinion, are state students. And if they continue the model, or if they want to, contract with the state, we'll pay 100% for the students because they're ours. It's like when you're in state custody, whether it's a foster child or in state custody, it's our kids. And so if you're in DJJ, so I don't want that to be an impediment to how you observe, how you view this.
Mr. Roy.
Chairman Jones, no.
That's fine.
Well, because we've worked together for my entire 12 years on this board, and even before it in my other roles in government before there. I'm gonna go 360 on you. I'm gonna challenge something, agree with some, and then challenge again. Because I respect the heck out of what you do in your role. And it's tough sometimes because we have a role, and we talked about it in audit. At SB 68, we spent a lot of this morning on that and the obligations of the districts and their financial obligations from legislation. We spent a lot of our morning on legislation, which was a good thing. But I think part of the perception that some in the legislature have, and it's been mentioned, it's one of the things you said, and one of the things that I want to challenge, is that some of this is a dumping ground. And it may be some, you mentioned the 30%, but there are children that are being served here that have no other choices. They're not being dumped. They've already been dumped. The society has dumped them, or this is a spot for them to be safe for their life. I've been very involved in this, more so than I ever wanted to over the last 12 months, because one of those kids' last name is Royal. I've met some of these kids that are there are kids that have to work during the day because they have to help put groceries on the table. We're coming up on Thanksgiving. These kids aren't going to be walking into family and a turkey in the oven. That's not the life situation they have, and they didn't choose on that. So I strongly reject a broad brush on that. But also, I know that the funding model on this is broken. Shared budget twice, vice chair and chair, worked with y'all, Dickey and England, all this a lot. This does have to change. They are severely overfunded. Their reserve balances are way high. The $7,000 QBE, $43 million. This is a much more effective, and I think from a public policy perspective, we should be really looking more strongly at this because it is such a efficient mechanism for these kids. Because you're right, we've got part-time teachers. We need to look at, there's a lot of moving pieces, don't want to get into all that, but it is severely overfunded. Couldn't agree more on that. Because I've heard of one, and also maybe the 30%, I don't know what the number is, Is it 30%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? I don't know. It doesn't really matter, because there are kids there that this is their only chance to get it right. I don't know who this helped more, and I'm struggling right now because I'm sitting here today as a state board member and have a responsibility in policy for the state of Georgia, and I'm also an uncle and a dad. So gotta separate those two parts of the brain sometimes, and it's hard to do. But there are so many of these kids that have already been dumped. But I know one superintendent referred to it as the foothills effect, to your talking about accountability. I'm not gonna say I'm the most outspoken member on this board about accountability and why we should, but damn sure give everybody else a run for their money.
I think you've got that
Yeah.
covered.
Okay, so we're on the same side of the coin of that. We have to figure out, and it's not rocket science, how we can hold the systems accountable for what they had there and have that transfer back, but also, the foothills is picking these kids up broken, and and every ounce of, it's almost like our state special schools. Every one they get to graduate is an accomplishment. And it has to be looked at different. It can't be just a spreadsheet and a column on a piece of paper. But we have to fix finance and accountability, I think, with these schools. 1,000% agreement.
Well, thank you, and I agree with you, and I'm not suggesting that they don't do good work.
Yeah.
But looking at the $50,000 foot view, the funding is secondary to accountability.
Accountability. I 1,000%
Funding's
agree.
Easier.
Yeah.
But the accountability, I think you have to have local LEAs and that step up. And they felt good enough to send their own local kids there when it was free and there was no accountability.
Yeah.
Why is there any
Yeah.
hesitation? And I don't know, in the end, now that they're realizing with it's time to get going and figure out and step up, and I think that is the solution. There's no reason why the program can't continue.
And in that, on the 360 and coming back is where I want to challenge it is, you mentioned the law is the law, and it's where it needs to be. 12 years on this, and then about 8 years in policy on governance, and about 20 years of doing it. I've never met a perfect piece of legislation to get
I
passed.
haven't either. And
And I think, in my opinion, and very strong opinion, that I think we don't have time today, but back up with fact, I think there are some changes that could be made to this and tweaks to give the accountability, to work on funding, but not take away the actual beauty and prize of this school. And that's not taking a kid, and what we've done, and I know I've fought for 12 years, is to take down zip codes and barriers on a kid. To say if a kid, the opposite effect, if a kid's in Sparta, Georgia, that they shouldn't have the opportunity, if they have the opportunity and ability to desire to take AP biology, but they don't offer it, that they can take it at the Gwinnett School of Math, Science, and Technology, to break down those barriers. I don't know, you've championed stuff like that.
what's
But
the
if
barrier?
we don't, and they don't have a statewide attendance zone or a regional attendance zone, because I know Rockdale sends kids and to Foothills, and Morgan sends kids, and Gainesville's got their own, and that, kids are coming from there. That these kids, this is their chance, and as much as the kids, I'm telling you, I've been pretty open about it. I don't know who Foothills helped more, my niece or my brother. That there was an option for them to do it. They didn't choose that. It was, the district didn't put them in there. They chose that because it was the best option for their family and the children at the time, and so many do. I hate to see us, because you mentioned something, and this gets us too. Your job is to view holistically and avoid unintended consequences. I've seen it too many times where the pendulum is over here, and I agree with you 1,000%, the pendulum is over here, changes need to be made. But the result is the swing of the pendulum way over here, and the answer is really somewhere in the middle. My 1,000% honest opinion, and somebody's agreed with you, I can't think of any time I actually disagreed with you. But on this is that this pendulum, if we don't tweak this legislation, that this pendulum is over here. And we're gonna do it to the detriment of some students, and we'll never see their faces. We will never see their faces because we won't know. But we gotta meet it somewhere in the middle.
Well, the students come from local school systems, and I could say much of what you're saying about just about any other category of hard-to-educate students. And if they want to continue the model, the superintendents and the school boards, from whence those children came, they can offer the same opportunities that they are now. And it certainly doesn't have to be a full local funding, because this is an option for kids. They can decide, Walton County wants to provide, this facility, which is what, I guess,
Yeah,
they've got one of the sites.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the irony is, we're paying them a fee for that facility when they've been relieved of the Walton County local share for the students from Walton, but that's,
Yeah,
like
I agree
layering
there's
on and
problems.
layering on. But
Yeah.
again, the money is not as big an issue to me. I know of no other legal way to have the accountability and take away the dreadful incentives that there are, because for every kid we help, I don't know, maybe there's somebody who shouldn't have been there.
I'm sure that
Is
happens.
to make sure that the accountability rests with the school systems, because that's how we do education in Georgia.
I know I said we were gonna stop after
Yeah.
45 minutes. It's obvious there are people that still have questions, so I wanna make sure everyone can ask their question. We're gonna go to 2:45. I'm gonna add 10 minutes. And I didn't know if you were finished with your thought. I know that Dr. DeJarnett had a question. I wanna make sure anybody on this side that has comment wanted to make. And then again, if we have any questions, not just, legislature, if you want to ask questions of our partners at Foothills and Coastal,
We also have two online.
and we've got two online as well,
Yeah.
right? So,
Board members.
right.
Representative Johnson, first of all, thank you very much for being here. And Mr. Royal has made some of the comments that I was prepared to make, so I won't replicate those. But, and I think everybody on this board knows my feelings about the work that these alternative schools do. I've met the children, they come to our public hearings, their parents come. And it's been my belief that we need more of these schools, not less of them. Because there are parts of this state that are very underserved with this kind of choice. And that's how I've always kind of framed this charter, this alternative school, is a choice that many parents and their students choose for a variety of reasons. I'm sure you've heard them all. As a former superintendent, I also know that there might be an incentive for someone whose graduation rate needs boosting to encourage a student to go there. And I think there are solutions to that problem. I was under the misimpression until your presentation that this was primarily, with the House and the General Assembly, this was primarily a funding issue, which I've always felt was an issue that could really be resolved. I've never felt like that this peg belonged in this hole, that while the commission charter schools, there's a rationale and a solid economic and financial rationale for the funding they get, that this really didn't fit that model, but there was no other model available. What I'm hearing from you today is that it's not just about the funding, which I think everybody in this room is in agreement needs and can be resolved. But am I correct in hearing you say that your other primary concern here is about the accountability issue? That students who live in Morgan County, if when they graduate, they need to graduate with a Morgan County high school diploma.
That's right.
Okay, all right. And I'll skip over the DOJ issue, right, the DJJ issue right now, but it's, I'm glad you raised it. But I think that there has to be a path through, and I think you've kind of given us an option for a path through, so that while it may look a little different in terms of the governance structure, and it's going to look different in terms of the funding structure, that opportunities for students who are home caring for children but want to graduate, or are home caring for a family member but want to graduate, still have this opportunity. Because the students and the parents that I hear from time and time and time again is, this was my last shot. And because high school didn't work for me, I had a child, my mother had cancer. I mean, I've heard the story, and I know that those are individual stories, and there's got to be some data behind the enrollment statistics, and we probably need to see that, about who's enrolling, why are they enrolling. But my strong belief is that we need more of these schools, not less of them, because there are big parts of this state that don't have this access. And I also understand that in Fulton County, I worked in DeKalb earlier in my career, and I've worked with some large school districts. There are also some economies of scale that and I'm not sure exactly how many high schools are in Fulton County, but I'm sure there's more than 12 or 13. That there might be an incentive to send their student to Independence High because they can get them off their graduation metrics.
Well, they do still
But,
stay on the
but
system.
still, they still count for the district. And these students still count for the state. So there's, I think there's a path through for that. I'm all about accountability. I'm right behind Mike on that. But I'm also want to be mindful that this is not only a choice, but a solution for thousands of students in this state for whom an 8 to 3:30 high school 180-day program can't work. And their only option before was to drop out, get a GED, and then go try to find a job. And while that is an option, I believe this is a much better option. What I would offer is the resources of, I can't speak for the entire board, but we did talk about this at our retreat. And I did get the sense then that there is consensus on this board that we support the work that these schools do, that we think there is a solution, not only for the funding, but for the accountability side. And we would really like to work with you and the rest of the study committee and your colleagues in the General Assembly to somehow make that happen. That it doesn't become an us versus them or a them versus them. And because at the end of the day, I think a lot of kids are gonna miss out on a choice and an opportunity they haven't had. So, thank you for clearing up a couple of misconceptions I had, and I just offer the service and the resources of this group to help get through this.
Well, I thank you, and I would also encourage you to work with the governing board members who actually are the ones who can help in a solution.
Ms. Petty?
Yeah,
did you have a question?
just short, again, Mr. Royal and Mr. DeJarnis, I am in agreement with what they say, and I'm not gonna repeat everything they say, but I'm in agreement with them. But, I did have a short time that I was at Mountain Ed in the evenings. Many of these kids were not funneled from their school to this. They were already out of the system. They were already working full-time jobs for 2 years, taking care. Mom worked first shift, dad worked second shift or third shift, and somebody had to stay with the baby. but I think we need to find a path to this. I agree that if there were more of these, I would be happy. I live in rural Georgia, and there's not a lot, but the students that were my mentees, I don't think, but one of them maybe came straight from high school to Mount Ed. Most of them had already been out for a year, maybe 2 years, and they have graduated. They have become successful. They have jobs. They have homes now of their own. They're feeding their children. So we've got to find the way that gets us to that point without them going away.
Mr. Mason, did you have a question?
I do not have a question. I apologize for not being at the retreat, and I want to balance out, just to hear those presentations. And we can talk later about getting that.
Yeah,
information,
absolutely.
But I appreciate the conversation.
I wanted to make sure that we have all the information we need and what our role is.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not policy makers, we're advisors, but at the end of the day, the decision is there and with the local governing boards. But it's important that we understand what our role is in this, because we have been asked to ask questions and give opinions, and that's what the purpose of this was, to make sure we know and hear all the sides. And I understand you haven't had a chance to hear
Yes.
the entirety of the story. I did want to check and see if anybody out in TV land has a question. Looks like Frank's the only one we've got. Leonte, there's Leonte, I see you. Questions?
I'll make a statement in that I agree with everything that's been said, Dr. DeJarnett, Mr. Royal, Ms. Petty, in supporting the continued efforts of these schools. I sit in the 2nd Congressional District, the poorest district in our state, and we are not served by any of these schools yet. And I would hope, after conversations with a few of our superintendents locally, to confirm the need that we have for these services, that we can find a way to continue this work and expand these schools, because I hear constantly uneducated workforce and need more training for the workforce. And these kinds of schools can meet some kids at the point of their need to make a life-changing difference. And I just hope we can make an effort to work together to continue this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Leonte? No. I will assume he has no question. Well, it is 2:46. Does anyone have any, we've got like a minute. If you have any follow-up, final thoughts, I really want to move on. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate everybody's involvement in this. The dialogue will continue. If you all have any questions, you know who our partners are. Please reach out to them.
Feel comfortable to contact me as well, and I do encourage you to work with the superintendents who currently have this. Nothing would make me happier than to have night classes, something like that available in every county. It's actually, I can confirm, not available in Fulton County right now. But they find that with online learning, accelerating to the degree it is, and dual enrollment classes at the technical colleges, that solves a lot of it for them. But the accountability is what I think. We are all charged with making sure that the incentives are right in place, and that and there may be a way to make it where if a school system doesn't want to partner, at the very least we know their QBE money would follow them. But I do think we have to have local buy-in to make sure that the accountability is there. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
We appreciate your work. We will move on to our next work session. And this, again, we've got a 45-minute hard stop, so we're gonna stop this if we go that long at 3:32. And if we need to revisit it at another work session or another meeting, we can. If we finish before then, great. But we had a robust discussion about the assessments. I believe it was Marietta City, was it Marietta City and Putnam County
Putnam Assessment Consortium.
that came and live and out in TV land and talked about the challenges and sort of what are we as a board tasked with doing what should we have been doing if we didn't do it, and what are we supposed to do moving forward? There's some shall language there that compels us as a board, sort of like the audits report that we talked about, Mike. What is our role? And I don't think the conversation had finished. I think there was still some more thoughts and comments that some of the board members had. Again, I talked with Vice Chairman at the retreat, and we were both in agreement that we could, have these 2 work sessions, and again, have a conversation out in the open, full fidelity. So if anyone has any thoughts or questions about that assessment presentation that we had, and where we are, and what we need, or what your thoughts are individually or collectively as a board moving forward, this is the time to talk about it. And Stan, if you wanted to kind of follow up, kick it off if you don't mind.
Just for better or for worse, I've become the,
Assessment guy.
well, I don't know if I'd go that far. My concern was that when the assessment pilot consortia were with us in September, we told them this would be on the October retreat agenda and that we would have further discussion about it. And because of some delays in other presentations, we never had a chance to do that. At the superintendent's conference that was held back in October, I had the opportunity to talk to Eric Arena, who's the head of the Putnam Consortium. And also I had a chance to talk on the phone with Grant Rivera, who, as you know, is superintendent in Marietta City. And Tiffany and I were together yesterday at the Georgia Partnership. And and this is me talking as an individual. I didn't intend to speak for the entire board. I guess I'm really trying to understand as a citizen why there appears to be so much frustration with both of the assessment pilots, and I'm also trying to understand the design of the pilot, because I was not here when the pilot began. I remember talking with other superintendents. I remember reading about it. I remember some of the conversations at the state level about how they were, how 2 pilots were chosen. And I know the other states that are participating in the assessment pilot are running their own. So we're a one-off. And I know that, it's my understanding that some firewalls were put in place at DOE to make sure that this pilot was as evenly managed during the process of the pilot as possible. So the Technical Advisory Committee, I think, was the answer to that, where if the 2 consortia, either one of them had a question or a concern about implementation or about design, they could ask those questions of the Technical Advisory Committee, and then no one would accuse the department or its staff of showing favoritism to one or the other. And I get all that. I think it was a good design. But we've had COVID, we've had some delays, there's some extensions, and both pilots are at a point now where they're starting to double test students. And that is a time-consuming and a resource-consuming activity, particularly for young children. And I think both, and I think this is probably an unintended consequence, and again, this is just my opinion, and it appears that there's a level of frustration that's growing by both pilots that they're not getting any financial support on this. B, they're not sure, because there have been some changes in leadership at the TAC, that where before previous person in charge would answer those questions, they're not getting the same responses. And when we heard from Dr., I believe it was Pettit, is that her name? Mary Ann? when we heard from her in September, she was a lot more forthcoming and a lot more optimistic about where both pilots were than we were a year ago when we heard a report at the October retreat down in Jekyll. So I guess what I'd like to know is this a viable pilot? Do both of these consortia still have a chance at success? And because I think both of them feel like that, and I guess I am speaking for them because this is what they've told me directly. They feel like a decision's already been made and no one's told them. And if they'll just tell us that the pilot is not gonna, it's not gonna end up where one or the other is selected, or maybe bits of both. I don't know if that's even an option. If they just tell us now that that's not gonna happen, we can go back to work, that's fine. But we're now in the process of double testing students, and we wanna make sure that we're doing it with some hope that we can have an impact on the assessment. And I'm trying to be mindful of what the overall goal of this assessment pilot was, is that we would come up with a better state assessment platform that would be more even-handed. It would not just be a summative assessment that we get results from a month or two after the assessments are given, but as we do now with a state tool, have the opportunity to give formative assessments where we can get good diagnostic information on students and plan instruction as a result of that. So I asked Tiffany, yesterday, I said, here's what I'm planning to say. And if the staff says, well, we can't really respond right now because then we'd be breaching our confidentiality, about keeping it arm's length, just tell me that, because then I'll be quiet. But I think we do owe it to the numerous districts, and I heard from more than just Grant and Eric at the conference. They feel like they're learning a lot through the assessment pilot. They feel like there's value in it. They feel like there's a good hope for change. So they'll be glad to stick around and hang in there with it. But the people who are funding this pilot right now from a corporate level, NWEA and then now Pearson, who has bought Navi, they're starting to pull back because they're not sure that the pilot is going to run its course, and that there will be a decision made at the end that everybody can agree was objectively reached. So I really don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I think as time ticks and as we get closer to the assessment window this spring, I think our districts deserve a little bit of an update. And if it's not today, I'm fine with that, but I think our pilot consortia districts deserve a status report, at least some acknowledgement that there either will or won't be some money in the state budget to help them absorb some of the costs, or a commitment to do it at some point down the road. And then also maybe it's time for this department and for us as a board to go back and take another look at our role in the pilot. What are we allowed or what are we authorized in terms of the pilot, the guidelines that were filed with the feds? What are we authorized to do? What are we allowed to do, and what shouldn't we do? So, and I'm new to the game. I've only been here a year and a half, or going on 2 years now. And if I'm just beating a dead horse, then y'all tell me and I'll be quiet. But I know that this is a source of great frustration to not just the two districts that spoke on behalf of the rest of their consortia, but all of the districts that are participating in the pilot. So having said that, I'll shut up. And Richard, I have great admiration for the leadership you provided, and I hope you know that. And I have great admiration for the work Allison and Matt and Tiffany and all the rest of the staff do. And if it's part of the pilot that we're not supposed to talk about it, then just tell me and I'll go away. I'm really just kind of advocating on behalf of the districts right now. That's all.
All right, thank you. It's a lot to unravel. Does anybody have any other thoughts? I mean, again, this is just it's a work session, so it's open dialogue, it's brainstorming, it's whatever we need it to be, and if nobody has any thoughts, then we can just call it a day, but Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that the person from the TAC team did say and share, and I thought it was very, very good, is that the assessments themselves are very good assessments. And you know, she's very, very clear about that, but they're formative assessments. And US Ed essentially has put the cap in the lid on this and said, if it's gonna go through, it's gotta be a replacement for summative. And the TAC team was kind of saying, that's not happening. I mean, you have comparability issues. There were, I think they're still working through security issues and test data, student privacy, and that kind of stuff. Those things can be worked out. And the only way that they're gonna be worked out is with additional funding and additional time. But I think, our hands are kind of tied. It's not in our hands to say, hey, go forward with this. We've got to wait for money from the legislature. And until we get that, and then we give the budget the green light that includes that hopeful bucket of additional money, that's great, but I think the appeal has got to be made with US Ed. To say, hey, this can't, it cannot be what you're putting us in this box. And we can't get it in the box to do something it's not designed to do. And that's the problem. I mean, ultimately, you're kind of looking at a milestones replacement ideally.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And I think everybody sitting at this table recognizes the value of formative work, formative assessments versus the autopsy of an end of course, assessment. And I just really like the idea of being able to see incremental movement within a student that teams can respond to assist and create individualized instruction. And like I said, I know that we're hearing this, and it just pains me to hear the fact that these two consortiums, where they're going is that, they're double testing the kids. And, it's like, you don't necessarily want them to be, and when I say this, I mean it in the most respectful terms, you don't want them to be guinea pigs. I mean, at the end of the day, that whole double testing, not only from a cost, but a resource standpoint, lost instruction time, and everything adds up. I would personally, number one, like, if we're gonna continue this, and I think there's significant value in formative assessing, is that, additional dollars, number one, and, conversations that we could have with legislature arguing for those things. And then, secondly, is that, there's gotta be some kind of relief that we get from US Ed and the box that we're, just my 2 cents.
Mr. Roy.
Yeah, and Scott, you're not, and Stan, you're not off really on any of it. It's, let's say, surprisingly, somebody was vocal during that and actually chaired during that and some of those committees. One thing you weren't aware of because you weren't here is those districts knew those kids were gonna be guinea pigs for a shorter period of time.
Right.
I mean, that was known. That was, the double testing was part of the reality of what was going to have to be done because of comparability. We needed data, we needed comparability data. If I heard comparability one time, it was $1 billion during that.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah, but here's where we're going, and some of them knew of that. I think what we're missing here and it's, and like I say, this is not pointed at DOE, anybody, and us is leadership on this. This was passed and done, and the bill was signed, the letter was sent in to the feds. Richard sent asking for and did what we needed to as the maximum flexibility under the law. The law says we're supposed to do that. Ask for the maximum flexibility under the law from US Ed. And then, there was, the pictures were made, the smiles were done, they started to go to work, and then COVID hit. And then we didn't get people hired. I mean, they say there's reasons, there's excuses and reasons, and that's literally not pointing any fingers at anybody. But what I believe these districts, and I've heard from some, not just Marietta and Putnam, others, is they want honesty. And if they honestly believe this was gonna be a priority of the state, they'd find the dollars to do it. And not that, we need to try to lobby, but that's would be a reason, an excuse, not the reason not to do it. I think if we came together and prioritized this as a department and a board together and could move forward together on this, like where we were when the bills came out, and that it would breathe new life into it. Because I've had superintendents say, does anybody want to support it? They're favoring Navi over MAP or MAP over Navi. Well, no, I've also heard no, the department wants to use the one they're using and they're putting resources into that and they don't want either. I don't think any of those are true, honestly. What we need to be doing is having a true pilot, and that's what a pilot does, is you gather information and learn which one's better. You take from all the above and you come up with a system to move forward so we have kids formatively assessed.
Can I add?
And do that. So that, yes, but that's just where I'm frustrated, but I'm frustrated with me as I expressed in there. I mean, and myself as a member of this board and not taking it and doing it, because I honestly believe this could be one of the most significant things we could do as a board for the children, and not even just for Georgia, for the country, is show that formative assessments could be work. What I also have heard from some of my other friends in other states is that and I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but they've almost been asking for forgiveness rather than permission with US Ed on comparability. Because the rules of the game then versus the rules of the game now with COVID, we are not going to achieve comparability, statistical care. I don't get your.
You're right.
I forget the what's the name of the people that do all the high?
Psychometrist.
Whatever they are.
My psychometric.
Psychometric, whatever. I think there is not gonna be comparability. Am I wrong, Allison?
I will say, the comparability requirements in federal law are probably the biggest challenge of the Innovation Assessment Demonstration Authority. That said, the way we have interpreted that is, we understand this is a pilot, right? The intent is to continue building, improving, expanding. So we've been very liberal in how we interpret comparability, to give them the best chance to get to the point where they can implement and move milestones during the pilot period and gather that data that you're looking for.
And from what I'm being told, some of the other states aren't even being liberal, they're just saying, screw it, we're moving forward with it. And not even trying to do comparability studies anymore because the data is so jacked up.
It's a very technical phrase.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of the screw it school.
Well, I know Frank understands that in South Georgia, he understands that.
It was a technical.
Yeah, okay, the heck with it, pardon me, the heck with it, and move on. So, but I'm gonna stop there but I'm just gonna stop by saying, I will die on that hill if I thought we could get done with it and we could get this accomplished. But we've got to have, nothing is gonna happen with this at a statewide level without leadership. And that's what we're desperately missing, and I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. But without leadership on this, we're not gonna get there where we need to be.
Well, I'm gonna add on to this because at the very original start of this and what you said, Stan, and everybody said is so true. I think it was Mike Royal and myself and Scott were the initial people on that innovative assessment thing when we all met in the area on the West Tower in Wagosa. There were lots of people there. There were actually 3 groups involved at one time. And it said that we were to come up with formative assessments. We were looking at having formative assessments that rolled into a summative test. And Cobb County was part of that, and then they rolled out, and now we have a NAVI and IMAP. And in that, and tell me if I'm wrong, Allison, but in that agreement, we were to do a pilot, and we're coming to the last year of this pilot. And the pilot was to see formative assessments, and teachers were asking for this on time. Tell me how my student is doing on time with the test. These formative assessments were in line, and then at the very end, we were looking, how could you roll a formative assessment into a standardized test? What we have, the real elephant in the room is that type of standardized test is different from milestones. Milestones is telling me how well, as a 5th grade teacher, how well my students in my 5th grade class compared to other students across the state
Last year.
And we get it late. It's a great test. You have done, I can't say for that. But what teachers in this pilot and the systems were looking for was something more that after you did the formative assessments, we rolled it up into a test, and I know we're capable of doing this, is coming up with another kind of test. Do y'all remember the Iowa test of basic skills?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah, we're
Well,
good.
Yeah.
those were I know, we're dating ourselves,
Well,
but that was
it's
some,
another kind of test, but it.
but it came back and said, oh my gosh, as a 5th grade teacher, this student, has a score of 78. It goes up a little bit, sometimes 80, but right here is what happened. He doesn't know decimals. And he's missed decimals, and as it gets more advanced and more advanced, it pinpoints a little bit deeper as to what those specific needs are to meet kids, to help them learn and help parents. I don't know, Allison, because Beacon, we put Beacon in place here. And Beacon is aligned to help kids take milestones and understand how to take the test better. It gives us samples of things, and we have a big pool there. I don't know the answer to this totally, but as we've all said, there has to be an answer to these consortiums, because that was by law what we were trying to do. It's 2 separate entities in a way here. And Richard, I don't know what your thought has been on this, or what we've done about this and coming around. I mean, would we have 2 state tests, or what would we do if you pull this, or we would develop this in another way, as Mike said, other states are doing, and just going, okay, I'm liking the way these formative things are aligned here. I mean, I don't know the answer to this, but I know that those are the facts of how this came about, and this is what it was meant to do, and the answer was to come up with either these formatives rolled into summative, and that would be a type of test, and we already had milestones, and we've been working on it. That's the fact, and you said it, Stan, too, what happens to milestones with this? How do you use this to better pinpoint things in our state for our students? But that came about when I was chairing, then Mike took over, and Scott. It was a whole years, and it's still, are we in our 4th or 5th year now?
We're in year 4.
The 4th year. And we've been unfair, I feel like, to these districts, these consortiums. And they've asked for help, they've asked for an answer. And they're doing good things. If you ask teachers in their district that are working on that, which you did, they're saying, oh my gosh, I couldn't do without this. You talk about accountability for students, they're growing. You can see the needle, the growth, the whole thing. Mike, I just piggybacked on what you said, but all of that's something.
Well, it's where do we go from here?
Yeah.
That's Stan's question.
That's all I'm asking, and
I wanna,
this may be an answer for another day, not a question,
Yeah.
but yes.
I wanna just kind of fast forward a little bit, and I was just trying to think of, somewhat of an analogy here, because when Godot is looking at fulfilling testing programs, they're putting that out to bid. Okay, and it's going out to bid in the marketplace. When the US Department of Defense puts out a contract and said, I want you to build the next generation fighter, you know, they're typically putting it out with certain specifications and so forth, and they're saying, y'all can go ahead and give us what it is, but we're selecting one, we're not selecting two, we're not selecting three. You're selecting one. And at the end of the day, these are pilot programs. And still, even beyond that point where, you know, one is evaluated favorably, both are evaluated favorably, you're still gonna be in this competitive situation where we're looking at the Department of Ed going out and saying, all right, this is what we need, this is what we want. And so this is still a long ways off. I mean, they're still kind of in the R&D phase, more so than anything else. And that's the reason, Mike, I was talking about the funding element to it. I don't know that either one of them are, I mean, engaged on the science side yet, for example. I mean, that's another element. I mean, they've done the ELA, they've done math, but I don't think the science element is there. So, you know, they're still a long way away. And again, I'll just go back to what that person with the TAC team had to say, is that, you know, they're doing some great work and they're really solid formative tools. And my hope is that we're still gonna be able to reduce some of these testing requirements, get out from underneath US Ed, we'll call it those unfunded mandates and restrictions that we're at. And that's really, I think, where we can have some impact. I mean, because we're looking at a tool that I think is incredibly valuable and is very, very useful, and I know that the members on this board support it.
Well, here's what I'd like to see. If it's just, if I was king. I'd like to see, I'd like to hear from the assessment division at some point about how this was set up, so that we'll all have the same level of understanding and what the guardrails are from a federal level. Also from a state level, you know, I mean, we're in the middle of curriculum revision, we're having new standards adopted. Which set of standards are going to be piloted statewide? Or one, the other, or both? Are there other grant opportunities that the pilots could pursue to get some funding if there's nothing in the state budget? Maybe there's some federal money out there. I'm just asking. I don't know the answers to any of these questions, and I know that good lawyers never ask questions they don't always know the answer to. That's why I didn't choose that profession.
We're paid way less than lawyers here.
Anyway, but I'd like to know what the systems that were participating, what their guardrails are, what they, you know, were told at the beginning. And if the state's not gonna fund it, there's some grant money out there that's available, so that they can continue without such a resource burden. And I think all of us know that there has to be a summative assessment. And it has to be a criterion referenced summative assessment, not a norm referenced one. So, you know, is there a plan B that includes maybe some some formative assessments to go along with this summative that we already have? I mean, is that even an option?
It is.
Those are questions that I'd like to have answered sooner rather than later, not today, but sooner rather than later.
Chairman, just to add to that, aside from making decisions of like who do we pick and where do we go from here, I'd also like us to reflect on what we've learned from this process as a board and a department. Like we can't ignore the process and acknowledge what's happened in these 4 years, okay? And then specifically, what have the pilot sites learned that can be shared with our assessment department? How is that information processed, and how can we inform, how is that gonna inform decisions moving forward? The dance between curriculum and instruction is always gonna be tenuous and necessary, but 7 years ago, we weren't talking about formative assessments. Not like this, not on the level of understanding, but guess what? Teachers have always been talking about it because they always do it. So if we can ourselves, and maybe Finna, there's room to continue this conversation when appropriate in committee work. Maybe, just to be open to continually learning from this and asking questions, because we're not gonna be able, there's so many things that are unanswered back at the pilot sites and in this room right here that we're gonna have to continue to process. So I don't think we can table this conversation. I think it's just gonna continue because,
And evolve,
yeah, it will.
which is the intent. We just ran out of time.
But thanks for the
Wanted
work
to discuss
session.
this, yeah, and,
I mean,
Yeah.
really,
yeah, I mean, and
putting it on the
we'll
agenda makes
continue to
sense.
have this discussion and other discussions. We have to do it here, right, and we all know that. But, I just wanna make sure that we're all or we know what page we're turning to in the book, so to speak. I mean, I feel like we're on chapter 5, page 204, and some of us never read the first 203 pages. So we're here we are, just try to get the Cliff Notes and understanding, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more comments or
Dan.
thoughts regarding this? Wow, well, again, we'll continue the dialogue. I appreciate the input. Is there anything else for the good of the board from a committee perspective? All right, well, we are going to adjourn our committee meetings, and we will commence the regular meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. And thank you all for your work today and being patient and asking the right questions. There's not a wrong question, when you're trying to find out how work sessions, they're only good questions. So thank you all, and see you tomorrow.
So she was.
Sure did.